Can I drink red wine on a ketogenic diet? Well, we spent the 2 afternoons testing 2 different red wines and what they did to our blood glucose and ketones, and we are going to bring those results to you in this episode. But what we first want to do is understand what alcohol does to your liver.
Right. So your liver processes alcohol. Your liver is also where ketogenesis happens and gluconeogenesis, so it makes ketones and glucose at different levels, depending on where you're at. But your alcohol is responsible for processing that, or your liver is responsible for processing that alcohol. The alcohol is, it's seen as a poison, right? It's a toxin. So what we have surmised is that, and if they've kind of tested this with, diabetics have to be very careful with alcohol intake, because when your liver starts to process the alcohol, the tendency is to shut down on these other processes.
Right.
It's not making ketones and it's not making glucose. So glucose in diabetics can drop dangerously low.
Right. So we would expect both of those things to come down, right? Ketones and glucose.
Right.
But what people are really interested in, I think, with the question of drinking red wine while you're on a ketogenic diet is this going to disrupt my body's ability to lose weight?
Right. So the key factor in this, I think, is because we expect ketones to come down when you're drinking alcohol, has to do with how much of an insulin response are you going to get from whatever you're drinking? How much glucose or sugar is in the wine, the beer, the alcohol, whatever it is.
Right, because your liver might stop making glucose, but if you are consuming sugar, then you're going to have a blood sugar response and potentially an insulin response.
Right.
So let's take a look at how 2 red wines affected our blood glucose and ketones. And we tested Cabernet one day and we tested Zinfandel on the next. And I should say real quickly how we went about this. Yeah. We did not eat or drink anything for 4 hours before the test. Measured out 5 ounces of each wine on 2 different days, obviously. Right. We took a baseline reading of our blood glucose and ketones at 0 minutes, drank the wine, took another reading at 30 minutes, 60 minutes, and 120 minutes. So if we start with, let's break this down and look at our ketones first.
Okay.
Right? So for my ketones for the Cabernet and the Zinfandel.
Okay, so with the Cabernet is supposedly a drier wine. That's what we started with. So Becky's ketones started at 1.1, at 30 minutes went to 0.8, at 60 minutes went to 0.7, and at 120 went to 0.8. So with the not so dry red wine, that's Zinfandel, or that's supposedly not so dry red wine, you started at 0 at your baseline at 1.0. At 30 minutes, you were at 0.8. At 60 minutes, you were at 0.8. And at 120, you were at 0.7. It's very similar readings. You dropped about 0.3, 0.2. But you stayed, after that initial 30 minutes, you stayed pretty even in there.
Right.
So, of course, my results are much, much different. With the dry red wine, the Cabernet, I started at 0.6. And at 30 minutes, I dropped to 0.3. I was at 0.3 at 60 minutes, and I was at 0.4 at 120. So technically, I was out of ketosis at that point in time. Right. So the not so dry red wine, the Zinfandel, I started at 1.0. We actually started at the same place. At 30 minutes, I was dropped down to 0.6. And at 60 minutes, I had dropped down to 0.4. And then at 120, I had bumped up to 0.7. Right.
So that's interesting. So you... in some of these tests, we did see that we were starting to come back up into ketosis. But in this last test for you, you did significantly come up. And we'll talk about maybe why we think that might be in just a moment. But I think it'll be good for us to first go through what our glucose responses were after drinking the 2 different wines.
So with the Cabernet, Becky's glucose started at 88, went up slightly to 92 at 30 minutes, then down to 75 at 60, and at 120 minutes she was at 74. With the Zinfandel, the not so dry wine, you started at 78, went up slightly to 81, down to 77 at 60 minutes, and at 120 you were at 66. My glucose with the dry red wine, the Cabernet, started at 85, but at 30 minutes I was up to 99. So that was a significant. That's a significant enough increase to say that I, may have had an insulin response due to that. And then at 60 minutes with that, I was down to 75, and then I was down to 64 at 120. With the Zinfandel, the not so dry red wine, I started at 97. Then I went down to 90 at 30 minutes. I went down to 79 at 60 minutes, and then back up a little bit to 86 at 120. So those, I think, are the interesting results.
I would agree with that. What we see from Keith's results was that when he had the Cabernet and his blood glucose went up the most significant amount at the 30-minute mark, he didn't have as good of a recovery with his ketones. But then with the Zinfandel, you never had a rise in your glucose.
No, it went down, 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 and then came back up a little bit at the end. But that's also the point where I had come back into ketosis. So it's just conjecture, right?
Right.
I'm going to say that at that point, my body, my liver had processed the alcohol and was back to making ketones and glucose through ketogenesis and gluconeogenesis. Whereas your body doesn't look like you were quite there yet, but I'm a bit bigger than you,
Right.
so.
Right, so I think we're kind of looking at the possibility that if there is sugar in the wine, that is going to give you the double whammy. So you're going to have the alcohol that's cutting off glucose, gluconeogenesis and ketogenesis in your liver, but then you're going to have blood glucose rising, which could increase your insulin. Well, insulin is going to have a similar effect, really, to alcohol. It's going to cut down on ketogenesis, and it's going to cut down on gluconeogenesis.
Yeah, insulin will definitely stop ketosis. I mean, it will,
Yeah.
No
So the sugar content of the wine may be what really depends on whether you can drink it on your ketogenic diet.
Right. And if there's a wine you like to drink, I think you're going to have to test it because these wines vary so much. And we expected that the dry wine would have the lower sugar content or have less of a glucose response. And the not so dry would be the one that would really kind of kick things off. And it was just the opposite, at least for me.
Right. Well, and we relied on a wine expert at the store to help us pick out a dry wine and a semi.
And why is that?
Because we don't know. Because we don't know. Because we tested Michelob Ultra.
And we're sticking with that.
We're sticking with that. That was so far with our alcohol test. That has been the clear winner for what we have tested.
And we should add that this is 1 5-ounce glass of wine over 2-hour period.
Right.
So.
Right. With no food.
Right.
So adding food is a variable. Having it late in the evening is a variable that we did not test here. So,
Right.
With that said, we hope that this was helpful to you. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll be back with more tests, and we'll be back next week with a brand new video. Thanks.